Welcome back to another YouTube video on my YouTube channel. Today we'll be continuing the mind and body unit of 3-4 philosophy, and today we're going to be discussing Descartes and his meditations. The pre-knowledge that you need for this video is you need to understand that Descartes is a dualist, so he believes that the mind and body are two separate things. Now for Descartes, we need to understand 3 of his meditations. So I'll break down the video into 3 parts, discuss his first meditation, his second meditation, and his 6th meditation. Now sit back, relax, get a coffee, and take notes, because I will tell you where to take notes to make sure you have a really good understanding of Descartes and his theory about the mind and the body. Let's start. Descartes' first meditation. The first meditation begins by Descartes taking on something he calls method of doubt. So he decides to take everything that he knows and disregard all of it so that he can figure out what is really true. So he believes that we should doubt everything, and this includes especially our senses. So he talks about how our senses often deceive us, such as things like optical illusions. Things that are really far in the distance appear small, but they're actually a lot larger when we're closer to them. And he talks about how these things deceive us so often. How can we know that they're actually real? How can we know what we're seeing is real? So that's why he believes that we must disregard all of our beliefs in order to figure out what's really true. He continues by talking about dreaming. Descartes argues that we can't know if we're dreaming or not because some things in dreams feel really real. He talks about how even when dreaming, things like geometry and basic shapes are the same as they are in real life. So how can we know what's real and what's dreaming? And he calls these things priori, and priori means things that are real, both awake and asleep. Descartes then circles back to talking about this method of doubt, and he talks about how even the things that seem the most real, and he uses the example of maths, could be false, because if God has deceived us in dreaming and in perceptions, then we must doubt even the most basic things, because there is a chance that that could not be real as well. Descartes concludes this first meditation by saying that a malicious demon could be falsely deceiving us into believing everything around us. Okay, so that's the first meditation done, and the second meditation is quite long, so I've broken it up into 3 parts, and I suggest that you take a few notes for each separate part, because there's some really key information in there to help you understand his theory better. The first part of his second meditation is the Cogito. So the Cogito begins by Descartes talking about how I have no senses, and he begins to wonder who the I actually is, and he concludes in this that because he has the ability to think and doubt all of his senses and everything that he knows, he exists. His ability to think means that he exists. And that famous quote comes from this: I think, therefore I am. Because he can think, he exists. And he says that even if the malicious demon is deceiving us, he still exists despite that. But right, don't include the I think, therefore I am quote, because it's not like direct from the text. He actually says, I am, I exist. So there are a few criticisms of the Cogito, and there are 5, and I'll put all of them in the description because I'm a YouTuber. But the main one is that it's a circular argument. So a circular argument is when A proves B and B proves A. It's a circle. One can't exist without the other. So it's circular because to think is to exist, and to exist is to think. The second part of his second meditation is the thinking thing. And so in this part, Descartes disregards that he is a man, as it's too complex. What is a man? He disregards that he's a rational animal. What is rational? What is an animal? It's too complex. And he concludes that he is a thinking thing. He then talks about why he is a dualist, why his argument is a dualist argument. And he says he can conceive of or imagine himself without a body, so his mind must be separate from his body. So there is a standard form for this thinking thing argument. It's quite long, but you should write it down. Premise 1, I can conceive of or imagine myself without a body. Premise 2, any part of myself I can conceive of myself without must not be essential. Premise 3, only the fact that I think is inseparable from myself. I cannot conceive of myself without thought. Premise 4, it must be my essential nature to be a thinking thing. Premise 5, This thinking thing cannot be a body, as I can conceive of myself without a body. Premise 6. However, this thinking part/mind is not nothing. It exists. Conclusion 1. My mind must be separate from my body. Conclusion 2. My mind is a purely mental substance. And the third and final part of his second meditation is that the mind is a better knower than the body. He uses the wax argument to explain our rationality knows better, how our mind knows better than our body. The wax argument uses a solid piece of wax and a melted piece of wax. Our senses perceive two different things, but our rationality knows that it's the same piece of wax, melted or solid. So he uses this to explain why our rationality knows better than our senses, our body. And then he uses the hats and coats argument to explain how when we see figures in the distance wearing big coats and hats, our senses perceive just hats and coats, but our rationality again knows that there are people. Again, that explains why our rationality knows better than our senses and our body. He uses this to further his argument that the mind can exist without the body, and he concludes that all of our knowledge does not derive from our senses, but from our mind's understanding and reasoning. So that is the second meditation done, and the last part is his sixth meditation. So the sixth and final meditation, he clears up his argument, and he talks about how he believes in the body, but he knows that it's distinct from the mind, and he believes bodies exist because he thinks that God will not allow us to be deceived in such a fundamental way. And then he also talks about how material objects do exist due to senses and imagination, but he makes the distinction between imagination and understanding. And he concludes his argument by saying that the mind and body are separate entities, why he is a dualist. So that's all of Descartes, and like I did in the last video, I'll give you a quick summary of 6 points that you should write down to summarize his text as a whole. So number 1, Descartes is a dualist. Number 2, he says that we must doubt everything that we know, like our senses and our body. Number 3, however, we know we exist because we are thinking, the Cogito argument. Number 4, therefore there is a difference between our minds and our bodies. And number 5, our mind knows things our body does not, the wax argument and coats argument. And then the 6th point is there are some arguments that back up dualism, such as interactionalism and parallelism. You don't really need to know it, but it can help understand dualism better as a concept, and those are arguments that back up Descartes' theory. Thank you for watching.